Thanks very much, Tom, and good afternoon to everybody. It's lovely to see so many familiar names there, and of course, we're delighted to see some additional people who possibly haven't joined us before. So I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Deaglán. As Tom mentioned, he's a chartered engineer. He's also a certified project manager with Arvea and represented Irish Water at all stages of the Cork Harbour main drainage project. So literally through from feasibility right through to construction delivery. With a degree in civil engineering and a diploma in mechanical engineering, both from University College Cork, Deaglán has over 30 years experience in the design and construction of large diameter pipelines in both gas and water industries. Deaglán is a Cork man, and he is very proud of his role in the delivery of this project to the people of Cork, and quite rightly so. On that note, I'd just like to hand over to Deaglán. Deaglán Healy.
Thanks very much, Anne. Appreciate it for your kind words. Thanks to the Institute and especially to the Project Management Society and the Civil Society for the opportunity to talk today. With a bit of luck now, I'll get my slide to move on. Just bear with me. Yeah, I'm going to be about 30 minutes today. And I've got slides for 30 minutes, and we'll have a couple of questions and answers hopefully afterwards. But really, I've been working on this project for 8 years, so I've got 30 minutes, and the most I can hope for is a mere appetizer to give you a flavour of A, what was involved, and B, how we went about the work from a project management perspective. I work in Major Projects Division of Arvea, and we are currently being transferred, amalgamated with Irish Water. So I, to all intents and purposes, work for Irish Water and have represented Irish Water on the project. So today is about giving you a snapshot of our approach to the project, particularly in terms of how we approach project management. And I've included my email address here because if anybody that's listening wants to know more in any great detail, please drop us a line. Myself and my colleagues would only be too happy to meet with you, whether just through a Zoom or whatever means, and get into the nitty-gritty of any particular aspect if you'd like to know more about anything in particular, because this is very light touch today. I'm hoping to do it, like I say, in about 30 minutes thereabouts. In summary, Cork Harbour main drainage is 144 million. It's taken Irish Water 8 years. We delivered it on time, within budget, and with a first-class safety record. So that's the project if I had to summarize it on one slide, but thankfully I've got a few more for you today. This slide would seem to suggest that I'm finished, but I'm not. But I do want to point out that we didn't do it single-handedly. It wasn't just Irish Water. We worked closely with Nicholas Dwyer throughout the 8 years, and we had many other consultants and contractors assist us along the way. There was over 500 people worked on the project. And this is just a big thank you to them, because to some extent, I'm speaking based on the experiences and learnings that we had with their help on the journey. We, as a rule of thumb, would have a safety moment at whatever meeting we were having. And I took the time to check the numbers, and my calculations have indicated to me, and I've asked people to check it, and a couple of people have come back and confirmed to me that if you're a construction worker or you work in a factory and in Ireland and you're a man, you are approximately 15 times more likely to take your own life than to be killed while at work. So suicide is a serious issue facing construction workers and factory workers. And if anyone wants more help or information, I would recommend that you contact P.IG, and there's some details there. It's worth investigating if you feel you can offer help to anyone along the way. The need for the scheme. Why did we have to do the Cork Harbour main drainage project? Well, there was a lot of bad press at the time, and rightly so, because approximately 40,000 wheelie bins of raw sewage was going in there every day. And the powers that be, I think, were sitting up and paying attention to it, because it had been through the European courts. Ireland had been found guilty for polluting the waters. not in accordance with the Urban Wastewater Directive, and 7 of the offending agglomerations consisted of Cork Harbour main drainage, and all that was left for the European courts to do was to sentence Ireland and determine the fines to be paid. And our early endeavours were to demonstrate through the department and the likes that, look, we were able to address this issue, we were dealing with it, and we were going to get there quick. So there was a pressing need from above in terms of the courts, and then on the ground from the people living in the area to say this is unacceptable. That was a good opportunity for Irish Water to step in and make a change. This diagram here just shows I think it's about 34 outlets, outfalls on the harbour walls that were discharging the raw sewage. You can see there's quite a concentration in Cove, but there's some so far down as Carrigaline, and we also had them in Ringaskiddy, and we had them along the way in Monkstown and Passage, and just raw sewage all day, every day since time memorial. It's a large body of water, and that's possibly why we got away with it so long. It just got, the water was big enough to soak it up, but certainly it wasn't doing it any good. What did we build? Well, the pink here, A, shows that we built a wastewater treatment plant in Shan Valley. We commissioned that in December of 16. Had a couple of connecting pipelines, and then we subsequently did works in Carrigaline, and we built pipelines from Ringaskiddy to connect to the treatment plant. And similarly, we connected Passage West and Monkstown to the treatment plant. Southside works, 2 contracts with Warden Burke. We then crossed the estuary from Monkstown to Cove, a job we did with O'Connor Utilities involving 2 directional drills. And the last leg of the journey was the network in Cove. We built a number of pumping stations, and in total there was 14 pumping stations, but that should give you an idea of the size and shape. So Shan Valley Wastewater Treatment Plant went from a greenfield site in September 15 to an operating plant in December of 16. So within a month, we had the base dug out, and 18 months later, the treatment plant was up and running. And we did that at some pace because, as I mentioned earlier, the European courts were looking closely at Ireland to say, are you doing anything to sort this out? We had to demonstrate that, yes, we were on target to meet, to make sure that we met the requirements of the directive quickly. Soon after we built the treatment plant, there was an article in the Irish Times by Joe Gill. I won't go through it, but I've included it in the presentation because it will be circulated to you. You may take time to read it. You'll see on the right-hand side that he talks about the 40,000 wheelie bins of raw sewage. And that was a measure that we referenced ourselves, we pushed out there so that people would understand the scale of the job. I've heard it on radio, RT Radio 1, Radio 2 on numerous occasions. It's been mentioned on the Dáil, and I've seen it in countless publications along the way. So it has served us in good stead. So once we had the treatment plant built, we then had to build a whole lot of pipelines. So we did this for 30 kilometers, big sewers on busy main roads and streets. What you don't see there is the fact that there are cars on a lane closure or road closure. There are diversions. There are pedestrians. There's children going to school and people pushing prams, and we're trying to bring in trucks and get stone in or out. And in many instances, it's tidal, and there isn't a pump big enough to get the water out. So you might have an hour or 2 to get your pipe in and the like. So you have to work around the tides as well. So quite a challenging environment. And like I say, we did that for approximately 30 kilometers in a safe fashion. This is the water tower house for the old railway line in Monkstown. It subsequently became a public toilet and it was derelict by the time we came on board. We have converted it to become a control room for the pumping station in Monkstown. The reason I show it is I want you to get an idea of the scale of the pumping station in Monkstown, which to all intensive purposes is like a large 2-story house, quite a generous house, which we put underground. It was built above ground by Warden Burke, and they subsequently dug out the middle and lubricated the sides, and lo and behold, the caisson was sunk into the ground and disappeared. So quite a feat of civil engineering by Warden Burke. And I'm going to talk about project management today, but I just wanted to give you a flavour of the size and shape of the things that we did. These are the lads that did it, and you can see there's a few wry smiles on their faces, and rightly so. That I think they were quite proud. But to the best of our knowledge, it's the largest box casing that has been ever sunk in Ireland or the British Isles. The town of Cove across the water. I'll draw your attention to the old town hall on my left here, this yellow building. And we built a similar structure to Monkstown Pumping Station in the old town hall along the quay wall here, which was easier said than done. When you look at the condition of the old town hall, it appears like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. You might note the holes in the quay wall, which were multiple. Our pumping station was along the right here. And of course, we had a plethora of deep pipes, large diameter pipelines going in and out of the pumping station. So we had to dig up the main street in Cove. And I would draw your attention to some of the large old buildings across the road. Here's one in the immediate vicinity, the Seaview Cafe, where approximately 12 feet from the face of the building, we were sinking a shaft of 4.5, 5 meters deep. So this building is cracked and it's leaning and about to fall over before we ever put a shovel in the ground. So we had to give safety a lot of priority. We had to proceed with caution. It was quite challenging. We were quite concerned, both physically and in terms of the commercial risk it presented for ourselves and our contracting partners. This is the old town hall during construction. Different methodology this time, secant piles you'll see around with a ring beam, and subsequently pumping station filled back in. I'll draw your attention to the fact the old town hall is still standing, thankfully. And we also erected a frame in front of the Seaview Cafe to act as protection for our workers while they were in the hole, the trench fitting the pipes. We weren't propping the building, but in the event that the building came down, the frame would act to protect the workers that were laying the pipes. We also crossed the estuary with two of the longest directional drills that we know of in Ireland. They're both over 1 kilometre in length when they were finished, and 500 millimetre in diameter. The hole that we drilled was 750 millimetre in diameter, and we did that twice. We did it from Monkstown to the dockyard. And this photograph here shows the first pipe being lifted into the hole. You'll see in close proximity to residential area buildings. We have a few spectators on the day, and that pipe, as it was laid out, was approximately 70 tons and went up the road for over 1 kilometre, 200 meters, 1.2 kilometers of pipe up the Glen Road. It took approximately 18 hours to get in the hole. And the second pipe was put in place the day before our first lockdown. So look, the crossing in particular went very well. We won the Pipeline Industry Guild Onshore Pipeline Award in the UK last year for it. And we also won the UK Trenchless Technology Award for wastewater new infrastructure last year. So we take a lot of pride in that success. I'm not going to talk about stakeholder engagement at any great length, but I could for a number of days if you let me. It was a huge effort on our part, the single most time-consuming aspect of the project, time well spent. What I have here is an example of what occurred in Passage West. We had to close the road on a number of occasions. The residents weren't happy, and neither were the businesses. In fact, the businesses were so disappointed when we went and we met with them and we had open information events, a number of. They took to the streets and they raised the profile of their objections in the Echo. And if you notice the headline at the bottom, it reads that the town will be shut for 2 months. So look, we took the time to point out to the business community that they were sending out the wrong message. And after some earnest discussions with them, within a matter of weeks, they were standing next to us. So the same people that are protesting here, 4 weeks later, they're standing next to us and we're sending out a different message which says the town is open and there are diversions. And one of the good news stories that came out of this was that actually the businesses in Passage really hadn't ever sat together in a room previously. And on the back of their engagement with ourselves, we assisted them in setting up the Lower Harbour Business Association. And like I say, I'll have my email address. If you're interested in this aspect or any other aspect, let us know, because I'll ask the people involved to come and assist, because we learned lots, and some of it we learned the hard way, and we're happy to share that experience with you. I've kind of finished in terms of giving you a flavour for the job and the size and the shape of it. Here are some numbers. I'm not going to talk about contract strategy or compulsory purchase orders, but again, huge pieces of work. For example, the compulsory purchases, we used Irish water legislation, never been used before. Similarly, some of the contracts never been used before. It was the first use of the NEC target pricing by Irish Water. And for our sins in the constituency that we were working, we had a teacher Taoiseach and 3 ministers. So there were lots of challenges along the way. And what I'd like to do today is maybe shed some light on the approach we took to our project management. I talk about PMO, I mean the Project Management Office. By that, I mean a team of experts, specialists, people who support the project team. So I said I was 8 years working on the project, and in parallel to the project being built, so too was the department. So when I started in 2014, there was 4 people in major projects. There's now approximately 74, give or take. So we're building a number of projects, not just Cork Harbour, but bringing Skiddy, the Greater Dublin Drainage, to name but 2 more. And in parallel, we're setting up a new department. And many of the people now in the department are certified project management practitioners, and I would recommend that you do that if you haven't. It is very useful, because as an engineer, yeah, a lot of engineers end up being project managers, but they're very different disciplines. They're not the same thing, and it's difficult to distinguish between the two, but the PMP training helps. It goes a long way. I want to talk briefly about people, processes, and systems. I'm hoping to give you an insight as to what we did. It's just one way of doing things, hence the graphic. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So look, you can take it with a pinch of salt. I'm hoping that some of you will be suitably underwhelmed and kind of go, look, we knew that already. But in that case, it should act as confirmation that hopefully we're doing the right things. It certainly has worked for us and reaped benefits. I'm not sure if any or some of you will have seen this. Perhaps you will. I came across it years ago. I suspect that some of you are reading it and smiling and nodding and relating to the experience and going, yeah, I can relate to that. I know what it's like. So what I would say, if that's what you're experiencing, something's wrong. It shouldn't be like that. I mean, that doesn't sound very appetizing, a bike on fire and everything's in hell. But it seems to be a common misconception that project management is just organized chaos. It isn't, it's far from it. So if this is what you're experiencing, there is something wrong. And I just want to talk about the role of project manager for 2 minutes. That was the particular role I had. And if you are very good at riding a bike while on fire, I suspect you can present your project to whatever project reporting committee, approval, governance body you have to present to, and you can make it look like everything is rosy and it's just, you know, it's good, everything's fine, it's haute cuisine, for want of a better example. The truth of the matter may well be something along the lines that there's a complete mess behind the scenes. And certainly if it feels like this in the background, then yeah, you are riding a bike and it is on fire. It should not be like this. The kitchen should be squeaky clean. It needs to be spotless. Yeah, the meal will still look the same, but the chances are you will not get food poisoning if the kitchen is clean, unfortunately. Doing it like this is not the way I would recommend it. I've included this picture because as a project manager, the point I want to make is you're not an engineer, you're not the communications lead, you're not the accountant. You shouldn't be playing ball. You shouldn't be in goal. You shouldn't be the midfield general. You shouldn't kick a ball. You're on the sideline, encouraging, supporting, doing whatever managers do best. They all have different styles, but your role is not to do, it's to support, mentor, coach, advise accordingly. And in order to do that, you need a lot of people. And thankfully, we built a team in major projects that allowed me to be a project manager. I didn't have to do all of the things that I would otherwise be doing and finding that the kitchen is a mess. So in the case of project our major projects team, I had a lot of support from really good people. And those people had capacity, they had the time available to work for me. The good thing was that they were working on other projects as well, so they could constantly cross-reference and benchmark and compare and contrast Cork Harbour practices and rates and occurrences and whatever particular aspect was being assessed at the time in comparison to other projects. But in particular, I had a contracts manager, a risk analyst, communications manager, a safety lead, a scheduler, and an entire Wayleaves team to support us. And these people who are working on other projects as well, they're not dedicated to the Cork Lower Harbour team, but they're there to support us throughout the project, and it makes a big difference. If you don't have those people, you will end up in this space. It will feel like this. You need a PMO, and if you don't have a PMO and you're doing a large project, you will quickly find yourself in trouble, I'd imagine, and it will feel like you're in hell. These are just some of the people, including yours truly on the left, standing on the sideline. Some of the people that worked on the project, and for every person standing there, I'd say there's probably another half a dozen who were directly involved, who we couldn't invite to the opening in Cove because of COVID restrictions. You'll see everybody is 2 meters apart, and they let us take our masks off for the photograph. And the one other point I would make here is this was the first opening of an Irish water facility that Taoiseach attended. So we were delighted that Micheál Martin was able to come down on the day and be associated with the project. So as well as good people, you need good processes. And we had the good fortune that our PMO, led by Richard Kent, built a suite of processes that work. And they work so well that they're ISO accredited in terms of quality, environment, health and safety. Well, what they are is a set of templates and tools and metrics based on best industry practice. So Richard and his team went out and spoke to a whole load of companies to understand how they went about their business. And based on those experiences, we built what we endearingly call the Blue Book. The Blue Book was a list of standard operating procedures. And on this next slide, I have a sample page. So I suspect there's about 100 pages in it, but this particular page talks about the project charter. And you'll see it simply describes the purpose of the charter, gives a description of what's involved in terms of the steps. Very important down here at the bottom, it explains, look, who's responsible. So there's a RACI and who's accountable, who's to be consulted and informed. And it describes the inputs for preparing the charter and the outputs. So each step of the project, from project award to design, has a series of sub-steps and operating procedures. And the Blue Book offered as a reference to us to make sure that we were doing all of the right things. And it proved very useful. It still proves very useful. And we refer to it on a regular basis to make sure that we're doing all of the necessary things in accordance with all of our standards and operating procedures and best practice. And whilst on the subject of project charter, I'd just like to touch on scope definition. So if you are working on a project, you need to have your scope clearly defined. And by that, I mean understood and agreed and formally signed off by all the relevant stakeholders. In Cork Lower Harbour, it was relatively straightforward. Our scope was to remove all of the public sewage that was discharging into the harbour. So if it was a public sewer and it was going in raw, we were to catch it and we had to treat it. If it was a private sewer, didn't concern us, and that became an important point for a lot of people with houses on the harbour. Say, well, how come you're not getting my house? Look, that's a private sewer, that's private business. Once the scope was clear, it meant that we could get on with the business. What I suppose one of the lessons learned, it's important that all stakeholders are fully clear as well, because their expectations may not be met. And that's why I'm saying, look, we want to make sure everybody's on the same page, but that everybody's in the same book and that everybody knows how to read. So there's it's worth taking the time to invest with the stakeholders to make sure that they know what you're actually going to deliver and what's been agreed. I briefly want to talk about information management, because it, for want of a better phrase, can get you killed. But consistent reporting builds confidence. What I mean by that is we in the Cork Lower Harbour and all of the major projects that are in our portfolio have approximately 14 reports that go out every month to a variety of committees, both internal and external. There is risk committees, there's finance committees, there's executives, there's board investment subcommittees, there's the board itself, then there's the department, and there's the EPA. And a variety of these reports go out to a variety of people, and each report is slightly different. And if the reports aren't consistent, you'll find that the head of finance is talking to the head of risk, and the report on Cork Lower Harbour is saying two different things about the same thing, and one is saying X and the other is saying 2X, and then they're beginning to question, do you know what you're doing? And they're starting to lose confidence in your ability to do the job. but what actually is it's suffering is your ability to convey the information that needs to be conveyed. And it's a bit like leaving your homework undone or messy, and as a result you get distracted and trying to clean up the mess of not having the information under control. You must control the data timeline. And the way we built confidence and control the data timeline was that at the month end, we run our base reports. And that's whether it's Excel or Primavera or Oracle, but whatever piece of software is dedicated to whatever discipline has a preference for doing what they do, they run those reports. We collate the tables and we prepare a dashboard. And the dashboard looks a bit like that. I know that's a bit of a blur, but that's just to give you an idea of the dashboard. And behind it, there's a whole suite of spreadsheets that back it up. Once we have the dashboard built, we then in the second week have a peer review of what it's saying to make sure it stacks up, it's correct. We understand if there are any errors, anomalies. Are they errors, or are they actually correct and saying, look, yeah, there's something wrong on the project and it needs to be addressed. We then present it to the senior team, and once they're happy and it's corrected for whatever typos or errors are there, it's baked, it's cast in, and then that allows you to generate and issue your reports to whatever parties you have to report to. So you have a single source of truth, and as a result, your reports are consistent and everybody's getting the report they need, and the information that overlaps or is common is correct, and more importantly, it lines up, it's consistent. And that builds confidence, because I go back to the earlier example of the risk manager and the finance manager. They're both reading the same thing on different reports. There's nothing to see here in Cork, and they move on to the next item on the agenda. And if you don't do this, you'll have to spend a lot of time sorting out your homework when you should be managing your project. So I can't emphasize the need to control the data timeline. And this has served us well, in fairness to the PMO team on what they do. This is the dashboard, and all it is an Excel spreadsheet, which is a cut and paste from a variety of sources. There's budgetary information from Oracle, there's contract information from Primavera, there's risk information from Pentana, safety information from our safety systems, a variety of analysts' input to it, and there's a whole plethora of backup data. But to do this, you need the right people with capacity, which comes back to the first point. You can have great systems, but if you don't have the people available to use them, you end up doing it yourself, and you're a bit like the project manager that ends up in having to go in goal when that's not your job. So I'd briefly like to talk about risk, if I may, because it's an important aspect of any particular project. Invariably, you will be asked by somebody senior, is gonna, how's it going, or how are you getting on? And really what they want to know is about, like, what's around the corner? Are we going to do it? Are you going to get there on time and on budget? So for managing risk, we have a risk coordinator who isn't a dedicated Cork Harbour engineer. They're part of the risk team in the PMO. They're very familiar with the project, and they coordinate the risk meetings. We use dedicated risk software. Pentana is the software we use. We use it every day to record our risks, and it allows us then to act as a journal, if you will, where we turn up and down risks and mitigating actions, and it generates actions for people to do. It's in daily use, and we frequently have risk workshops based on Pentana, where we're all looking at the screen talking about what's going on, and the frequency is dependent on the need. So Cork Harbour job is more or less done, so we meet on a monthly basis, but there were times on the job where we would meet every second day on risk to review them and have long workshops with the view to understanding what was required. The benefit of the Pentana is that it's linked into our enterprise risk management system. So when we're scoring risks in terms of likelihood and frequency, scoring scales that we use are standardized throughout the organization. So what is a high or a low or a medium risk for Cork Harbour, the same scale is used to rate other projects in other parts of the business. So then the big risks float up, and we know that they've been scored equally. So there's a calibration step to ensure that senior management are seeing the risks that they need to see, and there isn't an incorrect weighting or rating. One of the other things that we regularly do in the risk space is we carry out quantified risk analysis, and we do quantified schedule risk analysis. The first looking at the monies, and the second looking at the times, and they're two sides of the one coin. But basically what this does is it allows us to set and review the appropriateness of our contingencies. So we're running Monte Carlo simulations and probabilities, 3,000 and 4,000 runs of simulations of probability events to determine the likelihood in terms of a P50 or a P90, the probability that a certain amount or a certain time is adequate in comparison to the provisions of our contingencies and our budgets. I won't go into it in detail today, but like I say, we're available to talk to you offline, to any organization or party, the person that wants to know more, we'd gladly help you along the way. And when you are managing risk, what are you doing? You're, to a large extent, you're predicting the future. So look, for my tuppence work today, I would say I would pay attention to Murphy's Law and err on the side of caution in terms of your reporting of the future. If there is something outstanding that can go wrong, it's best to assume until such time as you have mitigated to a remote probability that it will go wrong, and you should be reporting accordingly. But I would caution this also: avoid groupthink. Just be careful of the henny penny, chicken lick and drakey lakey, sky is falling down type scenario, because it can happen. And similarly, I would be slow to cry wolf. By the same token, only far away hills are green. So I would be very slow to make something green if there's a chance that around the corner there's going to be a wipeout. It is a balancing act, and that's where there's a little bit of a black art as well as a science. It's hard to put my finger on it exactly, but hopefully this has given you some insight. We certainly err on the side of caution and would have far more reds and ambers than we would have greens on our reports as a rule. And if something is green, there should be good reason for it. I think this is one of the last aspects that I'm going to touch on, which is change control. And you'll see a slide of CAB there. Our CAB is not the Criminal Assets Bureau. It is a change approvals board. And it is good governance. And good governance is suitably experienced, and it stays close consistently. And our change approval board allows us to do that. So it's a senior group of experienced professionals within major projects. There's a heads of terms in terms of how they meet, a quorum of the number of people and the qualifications that they need to have in order for the meeting to take place. It convenes every Tuesday. All of the projects make written submissions if there's a change. If we think something is changing in our scope, our budgets, our timelines, our programs, our personnel, if there's something changing, we bring it to the attention of CAB. In the first instance, they'll confirm it's a change or not. In the second instance, they'll approve this subsequent mitigation or remedial action that we're proposing to take. It provides a written record of each and every change. We've had over 200 formal approved changes on the Cork Harbour project. And then that formal approval is a piece of paper that you can take to the relevant systems people to say, look, I need you to turn down that contingency and transfer this money over to that cost center. And when they ask you on whose authority may to do that, I can show them I have the change approval board permission to do it. So it informs everybody of the change. I have to confess, when the CAB was first implemented, I thought, as the project manager, I was kind of thinking, well, hang on, I'm the project manager. I make the calls around here, and who are these people? But really, actually, it is a blessing in disguise, because I now have to go through CAB. I still get to make the decisions. I just need to get them approved by CAB. But it acts as a safety belt or a parachute, or potentially an alibi if need be. So if you are implementing a CAB and you haven't already, you may experience some pushback, but that's not a bad thing. I would be a big fan and advocate of the CAB process. I want to finish, I'm conscious of the time. And the last point I want to make is I touched on our people and having good people with capability and capacity, and the processes that you need to have in place, solid, robust processes that make sense and help. And you need good systems that can be readily controlled, and I touched on the data timeline control. And the last point I want to make is that you can have all of these things and it still doesn't work. For the simple old adage, and I suspect a lot of people have seen this somewhere before, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we had the good fortune on the Cork Harbour of having a first-class safety culture. You'll see the safety stats there. I won't read them out, but the safety culture that we brought to the project rubbed off in other areas, and it helped set a tone. And we had the good fortune, we had good people with a can-do attitude. It was very collegiate. There was a no blame culture. It was okay to make a mistake. invariably, if you drop the ball, someone else picked it up and we get on with it. This notion of failing early and often, that's okay. And because we had lots of good people with capacity, so we had a great culture. And I think the culture was the magic ingredient on top of the people and the processes and the systems that allowed us to get there. And look, this is my final slide. And as Anne said, look, I personally take a lot of pride in being a Corkman and working on the Cork Lower Harbour Main Drainage Project. I'm also a long-suffering fan of Sunderland. And for my sins, we recently won the FA Cup in, when I say recently, I mean 1973. But the point I want to make about the Sunderland team that won the cup is that they were in the second division at the time, and not a single player on that team had an international cap at the time that they won it. And they beat the mighty Leeds United to win the FA Cup. So I suspect the culture was right in that organisation too. I know it's pushing on to 20 to 2 and we want to take a couple of questions. So look, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm happy to take a couple of questions, but I would reiterate the point, if you want to know something in greater detail, myself and my colleagues in Major Projects Irish Water would only be too glad to meet with you in a Zoom or whatever, and you can pick our brains on any aspect of the job that either that we touched on today or didn't. So thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Deaglán. I'm going to just jump straight to the Q&A there. We've got 2 questions in for the moment from both actually in from Michael Bassett. Thank you, Michael. The first question from Michael is, were there any areas that you couldn't pick up the drainage with the drainage scheme? So I'm presuming, Deaglán, as you've already said, private connections weren't included in the scope of work. So presumably that question relates to public connections.
Correct. And there's the areas in Ahad and Whitegate which are being dealt with separately with Irish Water, but they're making good progress in that area. And I'm aware of there's an area in the Inner Cove area that wasn't covered in the works. There were private sewers, but there was an argument that they were public, they weren't taken in charge near the bridge. And there's also about a dozen or so houses at the far end of Cove that were connected after the works were defined in scope to this. Look, there's the odd house along the way that was missed, yeah, and they have to be picked up. But we got 50,000 population equivalent, about 25,000 houses and businesses. So the vast majority, yeah, there's 1 or 2 little things that need to be snagged and corrected along the way. But yeah, we got the vast majority.
Thanks, Deaglán. So the second question there is also from Michael Bassett. So he is asking, what's the discharge standard, the BOD, COD and SS, which is biological, demand, chemical, and the suspended solids from the new treatment works that is discharging into Cork Harbour, and where is the new discharge location? So if we're not putting you too much on the spot there for the specifics.
I could make up the numbers, but I won't. I don't have them off the top of my head, but happy to take them out for Michael. Absolutely, we can do that. We'll take an action to do that. The discharge point for the new works is the old discharge point. It's at the mouth of the harbour between Roach's Point and Camden Ford. It's referred to as Dognose Point. So Carrigaline and Crosshaven would have discharged through an old IDA pipeline raw at the mouth of the harbour there. Now, you know, everything in Shanbally is now goes to Shanbally. It's treated in Shanbally and goes out through that old pipeline, but it's treated. So it's kind of halfway across from Roach's Point and Camden Ford. It's Dognose Point. There's a diffuser underwater there that we had divers inspect. So that's where the water is discharged through an old IDA pipeline that was built in the 70s.
Okay. I wonder if I may ask a question myself, Deaglán, just giving people a chance to maybe come in with a couple of more questions. Just, Deaglán, for a project at this scale, there must have been some lessons learned. Maybe if you could maybe just touch on what you might do differently if you were to do it all over again.
Yeah, crikey, yeah, could be here a while. But yeah, I suppose off the top of my head, something that occurs to me a lot, I suppose, is this was a road job. You know, it was road works, and we were very focused on the roads that we were digging up, and perhaps we didn't focus enough on the roads that we weren't digging up, but we were transversing. We were driving with trucks on those roads. So if I was doing it again, I'd probably go further upstream in terms of the supply chain, in terms of the suppliers and the deliveries, and the roads as to how we were getting our goods and people to site, but we were moving big machines and lots of pipes and lots of stone, lots of materials. And we did have complaints along the way. That's the nature of the business. And perhaps it was a bit reactive in terms of the routes that the delivery suppliers were taking. We probably could have been more prescriptive in our contracts with our contractors to say, your suppliers shall only take these routes and not other routes, and are educating the suppliers themselves in an early doors. So in terms of just maybe safety and traffic, it's probably we could have done more work in that space earlier on. It was a little bit reactive, to be honest.
And you're on mute, sorry.
I beg your pardon. I've one more question in there from Kieran Thornton, who's asking who took the responsibility for the condition of buildings and carrying out the works adjacent to the buildings which were in poor condition, for example, Seaview Cafe?
So yeah, good question. And we had a lot of conversations with our insurance team. And I talked about the PMO and the backup, but there's a lot of ancillary teams in the background too, and insurance was one of those where we even had the insurers down. But in terms of responsibilities, we made sure that we understood what our responsibilities were and what our insurances covered and didn't cover, and similarly what the contractors were. But our responsibilities were principally to our workers and then to the public, and we had to proceed in a safe fashion. And so when we erected the platform in front of the Seaview Cafe, we didn't brace the building. We stayed, half an inch off it. If the building was to go, it would lean into the frame, and the frame would take the weight. But we weren't taking any responsibility for pre-existing structures and their defects, and there was many of them. What we did do long and hard is keep a good record in terms of the nature of where we could get in and photograph and record and survey as much as possible, because there was genuine concerns about not just on the Cove Main Street, but on the back street on the G line as well, where we were working near a cliff edge. We had to proceed with caution. It was very slow on occasion. And in fact, in one instance, we stopped the works on the G line, not because there was anything unsafe. We just wanted to make sure everybody involved knew exactly what they were doing, going back to that old nugget about being on the same page and being able to read. And I'm talking about the guy on the instrument that's reading the telltales, to the engineer, to the insurer, to the project manager, to the director at the senior level. Everybody understands the risk and how it's being mitigated and controlled, and only then did we proceed. So yeah, it was complicated. It's probably not, I don't have the time to do it, but we'd happily go into it with anybody. Like I say, if you'd like to know more, we'll go into the details with you.
If I could just ask one last question, Deaglán, it's from Lewis Rogers, and Lewis wants to know, is the treatment plant expandable upwards, and what is the expected life?
Yeah, so the treatment plant is taking approximately 50,000 PE. The 3 tanks that were built can take 66,000 population equivalent. There's room for a 4th tank, so the headers and the main equipment, inlet and outlet works, have the capacity of 80,000 PE. So in terms of lifetime, it's somewhere in the order of 25-35 year design life, but depends on population growth and development in the Cork area, which is hard to quantify. As a general rule of thumb, the design life of the materials is approximately 40 years. The one exception to that is that the capacity of the crossings from Cove to Monkstown, the underwater directional drills, they have the capacity for 100 years. So we've sized them for 100 years. We do not see ourselves going back and doing another directional drill anytime soon. So those 2 pipelines should serve the Great Island of Cove in terms of its connection to Shan Valley for the next 100 years.
Thank you. Okay, so at that, I'm going to leave it at that now and just wrap things up. And I'd just like to say, Deaglán, thank you very much for a very interesting and informative presentation. And thank you also for supporting the Project Management Society.